Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. The photographs were still warm. Thomas O'Brien found them scattered across the abandoned campsite at Hoh River Trail, mile marker 9.3, and when he picked up the first Polaroid, the chemical heat of recent development radiated against his palm. He checked his watch. 2:47 p.m., October 14th, 2008. The campsite showed no signs of recent occupation. Fire ring cold, tent stakes pulled, no boot prints in the mud that the morning rain should have preserved. Yet the photographs in his hands had been taken within the last hour, maybe less. He counted 12 Polaroids total, each showing the same subject from slightly different angles. The campsite itself. Empty tent pad. Cold fire ring. The exact spot where Thomas now stood, photographed from positions that circled the clearing in a slow, methodical rotation. Whoever had taken these pictures had moved around the campsite like someone documenting a crime scene, or like someone studying prey. The last photograph showed Thomas himself. He stared at the image, his rational mind struggling against what his eyes reported. The Polaroid captured him from behind, standing exactly where he currently stood, holding what appeared to be the very stack of photographs he now held. The angle suggested the photographer had stood perhaps 15 feet away, directly in his line of sight. Except Thomas had been alone in this clearing for the past 20 minutes. He would have seen someone. He would have heard them. The forest here was dense with Sitka spruce and western hemlock, but not so dense that a person could stand 15 feet away without being noticed, unless they wanted to be noticed, unless the photograph was a message. Thomas slipped the Polaroids into an evidence bag with hands that trembled slightly, a tremor he recognized from 3 years ago, from the last time his body had overridden his mind's attempts at control. He'd come to Olympic National Forest specifically to escape those tremors, to rebuild himself in a place where the past couldn't follow. Forest Service work in one of the most remote sections of Washington state. Minimal human contact, maximum isolation, simple problems with simple solutions. But the past always followed, and problems were never as simple as they seemed. He'd taken this assignment, investigating the disappearance of Megan Price, because it was supposed to be routine. 29-year-old wildlife biologist, experienced backcountry camper, had failed to check in from her solo research trip studying spotted owl populations. Her satellite phone showed her last position as the Hoh River Trail corridor, specifically the section between mile markers 8 and 11. Standard search and rescue protocol: follow her planned route, look for signs of accident or medical emergency, maintain radio contact with base. Except Thomas's radio had stopped working properly about 2 miles back. And now he held photographs that shouldn't exist, taken by someone who hadn't been there. He surveyed the campsite again with the careful attention that trauma had taught him. Details mattered. Small things that seemed wrong often were wrong. 3 years ago, he'd missed small details, and his partner had died because of it. He wouldn't miss them again. The tent stakes had been pulled, but not casually. They lay arranged in a perfect circle around the fire ring, points facing inward like the spokes of a wheel. Megan Price's gear list, filed with the Forest Service before her trip, had included an MSR tent, but the tent itself was gone. Also missing, her backpack, sleeping bag, and research equipment. What remained? Her bear canister, still locked and full of 3 days' worth of freeze-dried meals. Her water filter, a Katadyn Hiker Pro, sitting unused beside the fire ring despite the creek running 30 feet away. People didn't abandon food and water unless they were running from something, or towards something, or unless they'd stopped thinking clearly enough to remember that survival required both. Thomas pulled out his field notebook and began documenting, forcing his mind into the familiar ritual of observation and recording. Campsite condition, gear inventory, photographic evidence. The tremor in his hands gradually subsided as he wrote, as his training reasserted itself over the fear. He was good at his job. He'd been good at it even before the incident 3 years ago. Daniel Morrison, his partner then, used to joke that Thomas could read a forest the way some people read books, seeing stories in broken branches and disturbed soil, understanding the grammar of animal tracks and weather patterns. That skill had made them an effective team, until the day Thomas had read the signs wrong, had dismissed small details as coincidence, had led them both into a situation that should have killed them both, but had only killed Daniel. The official report had called it an accident. Unexpected rockfall in the Cascade Range. Wrong place at wrong time, no one's fault. Thomas knew better. He'd missed the signs. The small cracks in the rock face that indicated instability. The unnatural silence that meant animals had already abandoned the area. The feeling, irrational, unscientific, but persistent, that something was fundamentally wrong with that particular canyon. He'd ignored his instincts, and Daniel had paid the price. After the funeral, after the mandatory counseling, after the review board had cleared him for duty, Thomas had requested transfer to the most remote posting available. Olympic National Forest, Ho Rainforest District. Minimal supervision, maximum solitude, a place to rebuild his confidence without risking anyone else's life. Now, holding impossible photographs in a clearing that felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate, Thomas wondered if you could ever really escape the consequences of missed details. Movement in his peripheral vision made him turn sharply toward the tree line. Nothing there. Just shadows cast by the canopy, the complex interplay of light and darkness that characterized temperate rainforests. But for a moment, less than a moment, a fraction of a second, he'd seen something. A figure, human-shaped but wrong somehow, standing at the edge of visibility. Thomas's pulse accelerated. He counted his breaths, forcing calm. One of the counselor's techniques. When panic threatens, focus on concrete sensations. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice 5 things you can see. Remember that thoughts are not facts. 5 things. Moss-covered spruce, creek in the distance, fire ring, tent stakes. His own shadow stretching across the clearing. Except his shadow had 2 heads. Thomas spun around and found nothing behind him. When he looked back at the ground, his shadow showed normal proportions. 1 head, 2 arms, the expected silhouette of a man wearing a ranger uniform and carrying 40 pounds of gear. He stood absolutely still, watching the shadow, waiting for it to betray itself again. It didn't. Normal shadow behavior. Normal forest sounds returning after his sudden movement had silenced them. Normal afternoon light filtering through normal trees. He was seeing things. Stress and isolation and the weight of this investigation were creating perceptual errors. The counselor had warned him about this. PTSD could manifest as hypervigilance, as seeing threats that didn't exist, as interpreting neutral stimuli as dangerous. The photographs were real, but his interpretation might be skewed. The shadow thing was probably just a trick of light. The figure in his peripheral vision was probably just his nervous system on high alert. Probably. Thomas forced himself to continue the search pattern. Megan Price had been missing for 6 days. If she was injured and immobile, time was critical. If she was lost and wandering, she might be anywhere within a 50-mile radius. If she was dead, well, he'd find the body eventually. The forest always gave up its dead, given enough time. He found her research notebook 15 feet into the tree line, wedged between 2 nurse logs like someone had tried to hide it. The pages were damp but readable, filled with careful observations about spotted owl nesting sites, territorial behaviors, and population estimates. Megan's handwriting was precise, each entry dated and time-stamped. The last entry was dated October 9th, 5 days ago. Site 7, 1830 hours. No owl activity observed. Unusual silence in canopy. No bird calls at all since approximately 1730. Temperature drop of 8 degrees in past hour despite no weather system movement. Recommend returning to main trail before dark. Something feels wrong here. The entry ended there, mid-thought, as if she'd stopped writing suddenly. Thomas turned the page and found nothing but blank paper for the rest of the notebook. 50 pages of unused space following that final observation about something feeling wrong. He knew that feeling. The wordless certainty that a place contained danger you couldn't identify or quantify. 3 years ago, he'd felt it in the Cascades and ignored it. Megan Price had felt it here and written it down, which meant she'd been smarter than him. But she'd disappeared anyway. Thomas checked his GPS. The coordinates for Site 7 in Megan's notebook placed it approximately 2 miles northeast, deeper into the Hoh rainforest, where the trails became suggestions rather than maintained paths. The terrain there was challenging. Old-growth forest with massive fallen trees creating obstacles, creeks swollen with autumn rain, visibility limited to 30 feet in any direction. He should call for backup. That was protocol. Radio base, report findings, wait for additional personnel before proceeding into difficult terrain. His Motorola XPR 7550 produced only static when he tried. Not dead. The battery showed full charge, all diagnostic indicators normal. But when he keyed the mic, the static that emerged had a quality that made his teeth ache. Dense and textured, almost patterned. Like white noise that was trying to resolve into something intelligible but couldn't quite manage it. Thomas tried 3 more times, adjusting frequency and checking antenna connections. Same result. The radio worked perfectly except for the part where it actually communicated with anything. He stood in the clearing, weighing his options. Return to the trailhead 6 miles back and report in person, or continue to Site 7 while daylight remained, potentially finding Megan Price alive and needing immediate help. The Ranger handbook was clear. Officer safety took priority over mission completion. But the Ranger handbook had been written by people who'd never held photographs that showed them standing in places they currently stood, taken by photographers who didn't exist. Thomas looked at his shadow again. Normal proportions, normal behavior, just a shadow doing what shadows did. He headed northeast towards Site 7. The forest changed as he moved deeper into the Hoh rainforest. The trees grew larger, old-growth Sitka spruce reaching 200 feet overhead, their trunks wrapped in thick coats of moss and ferns. The ground became a maze of nurse logs, fallen giants slowly decomposing while new trees grew from their remains. Everything was layered. Living plants on dead wood, on ancient soil, on stone that predated human presence in this hemisphere. And everything was watching him. Thomas felt it as a physical sensation, a pressure against his skin like barometric change before a storm. The sensation of being observed from multiple directions simultaneously. He'd stop walking and turn quickly, trying to catch whatever produced that feeling, but he never saw anything. Just trees. Just shadows. Just the complex interplay of light through canopy that created shapes his hindbrain interpreted as human, despite all evidence to the contrary. Except twice now, no, 3 times, he'd seen them clearly enough to note details. Figures standing at the edge of his vision, human-shaped but wrong in their proportions or their stillness or their color. Shadow black despite standing in patches of light, watching him with a quality of attention that felt intelligent and patient, and utterly inhuman. Each time he looked directly at where they stood, nothing was there. The counselor would call this a symptom. Hypervigilance creating false positives, his trauma-sensitized nervous system interpreting shadows as threats. The counselor would be right, probably. Thomas had all the risk factors. Previous trauma, social isolation, high-stress situation, inadequate sleep. His brain was primed to see danger everywhere because danger had once hidden in places he'd failed to look. But what if his brain was right this time? What if the past 3 years of counseling and medication and careful avoidance of triggers had dulled the very instincts that might save his life? 3 years ago, he'd felt something wrong about that canyon and ignored it. Now he felt something wrong about this forest and was walking deeper into it anyway, because a missing person might still be alive, might still need help, might still be saved if he just moved fast enough and paid attention to the right details. Thomas reached Site 7 at 4:32 p.m. with roughly 90 minutes of daylight remaining. The location matched Megan's coordinates exactly. A small clearing beneath a massive old-growth spruce, its lower branches creating a natural observation platform for spotted owl research. Her equipment was still here. Tripod for the spotting scope, sound recording gear. camera traps positioned to capture owl activity. But the equipment had been rearranged. Thomas studied the clearing with increasing unease. The tripod stood in the center, but its legs had been shortened to minimum height and spread at exact angles, creating a perfect equilateral triangle. The sound recording gear encircled it at precise intervals, forming a larger triangle. The camera traps had been removed from their tree mounts and placed at the clearing's perimeter, facing inward rather than outward, as if they'd been repositioned to photograph not the owls but the clearing itself. Someone had turned Megan's research site into a geometric pattern, someone with enough time and care to make it perfect. Thomas activated one of the camera traps, a Reconix HC600, and scrolled through its stored images. Hundreds of photographs, all time-stamped. He skipped to October 9th, the date of Megan's last journal entry. The first images showed normal owl research. Empty forest canopy, occasional bird fly-through, the kind of patient documentation that wildlife biology required. Then, at 17:42 hours, the photographs changed. Shadows. Frame after frame of shadows that shouldn't exist. Elongated human silhouettes appearing in the clearing despite no corresponding figures to cast them. Multiple shadows overlapping, diverging, moving independently of any light source. In one photograph, 15 distinct shadows stretched across the ground, all different sizes, all different orientations, none of them matching the single late afternoon sun. The camera had captured them at 1-minute intervals for 37 minutes. 37 photographs of impossible shadows filling the clearing, surrounding the equipment, reaching toward the observation platform where Megan would have been working. Then, at 18:19 hours, the photograph showed Megan herself. She stood in the center of the clearing, absolutely motionless, surrounded by shadows that had no source. Her face was visible in profile, and Thomas felt his breath catch because her expression was one he recognized intimately. Not fear, not confusion, something deeper and more terrible. Recognition. The look of someone who just understood something fundamental about reality, something that invalidated everything they'd previously believed about how the world worked. Thomas had worn that expression 3 years ago, in the seconds after the rockfall began. After he'd realized his mistake, after he'd understood that Daniel was going to die and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The next photograph, 1 minute later, showed the clearing empty except for equipment. Megan was gone. The shadows were gone. Everything back to normal late afternoon light through forest canopy. Except the equipment had been rearranged into those perfect geometric patterns. Thomas lowered the camera trap and looked at the clearing around him. Same space where Megan had stood. Same angle of afternoon light. Same configuration of trees and equipment. And the same sensation of being watched from every direction at once. His peripheral vision filled with movement. Figures standing between trees. Shadows that existed independent of objects. Presences that his conscious mind couldn't quite resolve into concrete forms. Every time he turned to look directly at one, it vanished, or transformed back into normal forest elements. Moss, ferns, the play of light through leaves, but they were there. He knew they were there the way he'd known something was wrong with that canyon 3 years ago. Instinct older than training, deeper than reason, the mammalian awareness of predators in proximity. Thomas pulled out his field notebook and began documenting everything, forcing his hands to write clearly despite their renewed trembling. Camera trap findings, equipment arrangement, Megan's last known position, the photographs, the shadows, the watching sensation. His training said to catalog facts, to maintain objectivity, to separate observation from interpretation. But his instincts, those instincts he'd spent 3 years learning to suppress, screamed that objectivity was suicide here. That whatever had taken Megan Price wasn't something you documented and reported. It was something you ran from. The sun touched the horizon. The quality of light shifted from afternoon to dusk, and the shadows in the clearing lengthened and multiplied. Thomas's own shadow stretched across the ground, and as he watched, it developed a second head, then a third, then arms that bent at wrong angles and reached in directions his physical arms didn't reach. He stepped backward, away from his shadow, and felt pressure against his back, like someone standing directly behind him. like a hand resting between his shoulder blades, like breath against his neck that carried no warmth. Thomas spun around and found empty air. But when he looked at the ground, his shadow showed the silhouette of two figures standing close together, him and something else, something with proportions that suggested humanity the way a stick figure suggested it, capturing the basic architecture while missing every detail that made it real. The counselor's voice in his head. Intrusive thoughts are not facts. Perceptual distortions are common in high-stress situations. Your brain is primed to see threats. This is your trauma response, not reality. But his radio chose that moment to crackle to life, and through the static came Megan Price's voice. "Thomas, can you hear me? Thomas, they're here. They've been here the whole time. They're always here, watching, waiting. You can't see them when you look directly at them, but they're always in the corners of your vision. Always. Thomas, you have to understand. They're not shadows of things. They're the things themselves. Shadow is what they are. It's all they are. And once you see them, really see them, they can see you too." The transmission cut off. Thomas stood frozen, his mind fragmenting between explanations. Recording. Has to be a recording. Megan made this days ago. The radio picked it up somehow. Atmospheric conditions. Equipment malfunction. Anything but what it sounded like. Anything but a real-time message from a woman who'd been missing for 6 days. His shadow had 7 heads now. Thomas looked up from the ground and saw them fully for the first time. Not peripherally, not half-glimpsed, but direct and undeniable. Shadow people. That's what the folklore called them. He'd read about them in college, in an anthropology elective he'd taken as an easy credit. Pan-cultural phenomenon. Reports from every continent, every era. Dark humanoid figures seen in peripheral vision, generating instinctive dread, associated with sleep paralysis and psychological stress. Folklore. Hallucination. Mass delusion. That's what the academics said. But the academics hadn't stood in this clearing and watched shadows move independently of light sources, hadn't seen his own shadow develop impossible geometries, hadn't heard a missing woman's voice explain that shadows weren't cast by things. Shadows were things. They stood among the trees now, dozens of them, human-shaped and absolutely wrong. Too tall or too short. Too thin, or with limbs that bent at joints humans didn't have. Perfectly black despite the complex lighting of the forest, as if they absorbed light rather than reflected it. And they watched him with a quality of attention that felt ancient and patient and utterly devoid of anything resembling mercy. Thomas ran. Training said to maintain composure, to think clearly, to make rational decisions based on available data. But training was for situations where reality followed rules, where threats were physical and finite, where running or staying made a calculable difference in outcomes. This wasn't that situation. This was something older than training, older than ranger handbooks and search and rescue protocols. This was the terror that had sent early humans fleeing into firelight, the understanding that darkness held things that wanted to consume not just bodies, but the very fact of existence. He crashed through undergrowth, branches tearing at his uniform, gear bouncing painfully against his back. Behind him, all around him, the shadow people followed. Not running, not hurrying. Moving with that same patient attention, always in his peripheral vision, always too numerous to count, always closer than they should be. Thomas's headlamp beam cut through gathering darkness, illuminating moss and ferns and trees. But it didn't illuminate the shadow people. His light passed through them like they weren't there, or like they existed in some wavelength his headlamp couldn't address. They remained visible only at the edges of his vision, only in the spaces where his eyes couldn't quite focus, only in the gap between looking and seeing. He tried to navigate back toward the main trail, but the forest had changed. Landmarks he'd noted on the way in were gone or transformed. Nurse logs that should have been to his left appeared on his right. Creek crossings that should have marked his route were absent. The forest itself was shifting, rearranging, or perhaps his perception was failing so completely that he could no longer trust any sensory input. Thomas's foot caught on a root, and he went down hard, sliding through mud and moss. His headlamp went out. His Garmin GPS map 64 cracked against a rock. In the sudden darkness, lit only by dying twilight filtering through canopy, he saw them more clearly than ever before. They surrounded him completely. Dozens of shadow people standing in concentric circles, watching him with the patience of things that existed outside time. He could see details now that should have been impossible without light. The way their forms seemed to shift between two-dimensional and three-dimensional, how they were simultaneously flat shadows and something with depth that extended into directions his eyes couldn't properly track. And he could feel their attention. Not hostile, not malicious, just interested. The way a researcher might observe a specimen. The way Megan Price had observed her spotted owls, cataloging behaviors and patterns. His radio crackled again, Megan's voice clearer now. "They're researchers too, Thomas. That's what I figured out. They're studying us the way we study animals, watching how we react to being watched, documenting our fear, taking photographs." Thomas remembered the Polaroids, the images of the campsite taken from multiple angles, the final photograph showing him holding the stack of pictures. "They don't want to hurt us," Megan's voice continued. "They just want to observe, to understand. But their observation changes us. Once you really see them, once they know you can see them, you become part of their study. You become data. And data doesn't get to leave." A shadow person moved closer, and Thomas finally understood why they triggered such instinctive horror. It wasn't their appearance. It wasn't their impossible physics. It was the recognition that they represented something fundamental about reality, that humans weren't supposed to perceive. Shadows weren't absence of light. Shadows were presence of something else, something that existed in the spaces between, in the gaps that three-dimensional thinking couldn't address. Humans cast shadows because humans existed in the light. But these things, these shadow people, they didn't cast shadows because they were shadows. They were the fundamental substance that appeared when light was blocked, the essential darkness that made brightness possible. And once you understood that, once you really saw them as what they were, rather than as absence or trick of light, they could see you too. Thomas felt something shift in his perception, like a gestalt switch, like one of those optical illusions where you suddenly see the hidden image and can never unsee it again. The shadow people hadn't changed, but his understanding of what he was seeing had changed, and that change was permanent. They knew he understood now. He could feel their attention intensify, their interest deepen. He'd crossed some threshold. He'd become interesting data. One of them moved directly in front of him, and for the first time Thomas saw it head-on rather than peripherally. The experience was like looking at a tesseract drawing. His brain struggled to resolve conflicting information about dimensions and depth. The shadow person had a face in the same way an inkblot had a face, pareidolia, pattern recognition desperately trying to find humanity in something that contained none. It reached toward him, not with a hand. It didn't have hands in any meaningful sense, but with an extension of itself that his visual cortex interpreted as reaching, because that was the closest available category. Thomas felt coldness spread from the point of contact. Not physical cold, something else. The cold of absence, of negation, of existence being carefully and methodically catalogued and recorded and transformed into data for observation. He was becoming part of their study, like Megan Price had become part of their study. Like however many others had wandered into this forest and seen what they shouldn't see, understood what they weren't meant to understand. Megan's voice came through the radio one final time. "I see them so clearly now, Thomas. I see everything. I understand. They've been here since before light existed. They'll be here after light ends. We're just brief illuminations they observe as we pass through. And once we really see them, once we become visible to them the way they're visible to us, we can't leave. We become permanent parts of their research, permanent shadows. I'm sorry you came looking for me. I'm sorry you found the photographs. I'm sorry you saw." The radio went dead. The shadow people closed in, and Thomas O'Brien understood with crystalline clarity that the counselor had been wrong. His instincts 3 years ago hadn't failed him. The canyon had been dangerous. Something had been wrong there, fundamentally wrong, in ways that geological surveys couldn't detect. He'd felt that wrongness and ignored it, and Daniel had died. But maybe, Daniel's death had been mercy. Maybe the quick violence of falling rocks was better than this. The slow realization that reality contained observers who existed in the gaps of perception, who watched from the spaces that shouldn't exist, who transformed human beings into data through the simple act of being truly seen. Thomas's shadow separated from his body and joined the circle of shadow people. He watched it go with a distant, clinical detachment. His training had prepared him to observe and document unusual phenomena. So he observed. He documented. He noted that his shadow moved independently now, that it had become something separate, something that existed in that space between light and dark, that humans only glimpsed peripherally. The last thing Thomas O'Brien recorded in his field notebook, his hand moving automatically while his mind fragmented into observation and data, was this: they don't take us. We join them. Perception changes reality. Understanding changes the understander. I see them completely now, and they see me. I'm part of the research. I'm part of the shadow. The entry ended there. 3 weeks later, another ranger found Thomas O'Brien's notebook at Site 7, alongside Megan Price's research materials and both their abandoned gear. The search team documented everything carefully, photographed the scene from multiple angles, noted the unusual arrangement of equipment into geometric patterns. They found no bodies, no signs of violence, no tracks leading away from the clearing, just shadows that seemed too numerous for the objects present to cast, just the sensation of being watched from directions that shouldn't exist, just photographs that the Forest Service ultimately destroyed because they showed the search team members surrounded by figures that hadn't been there when the photos were taken. The official report classified both disappearances as lost in wilderness, presumed deceased. Olympic National Forest contained millions of acres of old-growth forest. People vanish sometimes. That was statistical reality. But rangers stopped going to Site 7. Hiking trails were quietly rerouted. The Ho River corridor between mile markers 8 and 11 was designated as particularly hazardous terrain, discouraged for solo travel. And at night, when the forest grew dark and shadows multiplied in ways that headlamps couldn't quite explain, the rangers would see them, shadow people standing just at the edge of perception, watching with that patient, research-oriented attention. Always watching, always studying, always waiting for someone to truly see them, to really understand what they were. Because once you saw them, really saw them, you became part of what they studied. You became visible to things that existed in the spaces between light and dark. You became data. You became shadow. And shadows, as Thomas O'Brien had finally understood, weren't absence of light. They were presence of something else. Something that had been observing humanity since before humans had eyes to observe back. Something that would keep observing long after the last human light went out. In the darkness. In the spaces between. Forever. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened to Thomas and Megan. Lisa Hoffman had stopped counting the days since she last slept without screaming awake. But she knew exactly how many days it had been since she found the first trace of Nathan Drake, 17. The Ho Rainforest section of Olympic National Park wrapped around her ranger station like a living thing, moss-thick and breathing with moisture that never quite became rain. In the 17 days since Drake's Toyota 4Runner had been found abandoned at the Ho River trailhead, Lisa had walked every documented path within a 15-mile radius, her Garmin GPS 60CSX leaving digital breadcrumbs that proved she was still capable of following procedure, still functional, still not the person she'd been 4 years ago when she'd lost David Chen in these same woods. She forced herself not to think his name. Failed, as always. The coffee in her thermos had gone cold 3 hours ago, but Lisa drank it anyway, standing at her station window and watching fog condense against the glass. September 2008 had been unseasonably warm until 2 weeks ago, when temperatures dropped 20 degrees overnight and stayed there. The meteorological report she'd filed with the main office in Port Angeles noted the anomaly. What they didn't note was how the cold felt wrong. Not seasonal, not natural, but deliberate, like something had opened a door and forgotten to close it. Her Motorola radio crackled. "Hoffman, you copy?" Lisa recognized dispatch supervisor Karen Morrison's voice, tight with the particular tension that meant bad news delivered professionally. "Copy, Morrison." Seattle PD forwarded Drake's phone records. Last ping was 17 days ago, 11:47 p.m., from a cell tower near your position. Before that, he made 3 calls in rapid succession, all to the same number. "Whose number?" A pause. "His ex-wife's. She didn't answer. He left voicemails." Lisa's stomach contracted. She'd read the missing person report a dozen times. Nathan Drake, 34, software engineer from Seattle, experienced hiker, no known mental health issues, no financial problems, no reason to disappear. The ex-wife had been interviewed, had seemed genuinely concerned. What did the voicemails say? Seattle PD is emailing the transcripts. Hoffman, they're strange. You should probably sit down before you read them. Lisa was already opening her laptop, the Dell's fan whirring in the humid air. The email loaded slowly. 2008's 3G connection barely functioned out here, and when the attachment finally opened, she understood Morrison's warning. The first voicemail time-stamped 11:34 p.m. "Jen, I know you won't answer, but I need you to know I'm sorry. For everything. For not believing you about your grandmother. You were right. God, you were right about all of it. If something happens to me, tell them to check the old growth near." The message cut off. Second voicemail, 11:39 p.m. "It's not fog. It looks like fog, but it's not. It's thicker. It moves against the wind. Jen, I can see her in it. She looks exactly like the photos your grandmother showed us. The white dress, the hair, everything. She's been following me since I crossed the creek. I thought if I came here, if I found where it happened, maybe I could..." Cut off again. Third voicemail, 11:47 p.m. Just breathing. Heavy. Panicked. Then a woman's voice in the background speaking Japanese. Lisa didn't understand the words, but the tone transcended language. Accusatory, anguished, furious. Drake's voice barely a whisper. "She knows I know. She knows why I came here." Then screaming. His screaming. The voicemail continued for another 43 seconds of screaming before the line went dead. Lisa's hands trembled as she closed the laptop. She opened it again immediately, pulled up Drake's file, cross-referenced with the ex-wife's information. Jennifer Drake, maiden name Yamamoto. Seattle resident. Father American, mother second-generation Japanese-American. Grandmother. Lisa stopped breathing. The grandmother's obituary was 5 years old. Hanako Yamamoto died 2003, age 79. Survived by daughter Patricia and granddaughter Jennifer. But there was more. Lisa's search pulled up a Seattle Times article from 1968, barely digitized, grainy photographs showing a young Hanako Yamamoto testifying in a case involving the death of her husband, Kenji Yamamoto. He died in Olympic National Park during what was described as a hiking accident, but the article's tone suggested something more complicated. The case had been closed, ruled accidental. Hanako had never remarried. Lisa pulled up a map, overlaying Drake's last known position with the historical records of where Kenji Yamamoto's body had been found 40 years ago. The locations matched within 100 yards. The temperature in the ranger station dropped 10 degrees in 30 seconds. Lisa's breath condensed in front of her face. The windows fogged over completely, and through the moisture she saw nothing. She saw nothing, but she felt observation, dense and patient and absolutely convinced of something Lisa couldn't name. She grabbed her gear with movements made automatic by 4 years of forcing herself to function through panic. Garmin GPS, Motorola radio, first aid kit, emergency beacon, flashlight, knife, the Glock 22 she'd started carrying after David Chen disappeared. Her hands moved through the checklist while her mind cataloged everything wrong with what she was about to do. It was 4:47 p.m. Sunset at 6:23. She had 96 minutes of daylight to reach Drake's last known position and get back, alone, in terrain where fog could reduce visibility to arm's length in minutes, following a man who'd been running from something that had made him scream for 43 seconds straight. Every protocol she'd ever learned said to wait for backup, wait for morning, wait for anything except going into the Ho rainforest alone at dusk chasing ghosts. Lisa was in her truck and driving toward the Ho River trailhead before she'd consciously decided to move. The forest closed around her vehicle like a fist. Sitka spruce towered 200 feet overhead, their trunks wrapped in moss so thick it looked like green fur. Everything dripped, everything breathed. The road curved through shadows that shouldn't exist in late afternoon, and Lisa's high beams caught something white flickering between trees. Just fog. Just the ever-present mist that made Olympic's rainforests feel like the inside of a living lung. She parked beside the rusted barrier that marked the trailhead, next to the empty space where they'd found Drake's Forerunner. Someone had spray-painted a yellow X on the asphalt, marking it as evidence processed and cleared. Lisa stood in the lot, listening. The forest was silent. Not quiet, silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just the arrhythmic drip of condensation falling from branches overhead. Her GPS showed Drake's last ping position, 0.73 miles northeast, off-trail, in old-growth forest that had never been logged. Lisa checked her radio. Hoffman to base. I'm beginning search of Drake's last known coordinates. Static. Then Morrison's voice distorted. Hoffman, not advised. Alone. Say again, Morrison, you're breaking up. Wait for morning. Reeves is hours. Morrison, I'm losing you. We'll check in at 20-minute intervals. She turned the volume down before Morrison could order her back and started walking. The trail was well maintained for the first quarter mile, boardwalk spanning the wettest sections, interpretive signs explaining the ecosystem. Lisa had led tours here back when she still did public-facing work, back before David Chen. She knew these woods, knew how the light filtered through the canopy and golden columns, how the nurse logs cradled entire ecosystems of ferns and seedlings, how the forest felt ancient and peaceful and utterly indifferent to human presence. This wasn't that forest. This forest watched. Lisa left the maintained trail at the 0.4-mile marker, following her GPS northeast into old growth. The ground became soft, each step sinking 2 inches into moss and decaying wood. The silence intensified. She could hear her own heartbeat, her breathing, the rustle of her jacket against her gear vest. Nothing else. At 0.62 miles, she found the first evidence. Someone had carved symbols into the bark of a western hemlock. Fresh cuts, the wood still weeping sap. Lisa didn't recognize the symbols, but she photographed them with her digital camera, the flash creating harsh shadows that made the carvings look three-dimensional, reaching. The symbols formed a circle around the tree's circumference at exactly her eye level. Her GPS showed she was close, within 100 yards of Drake's last ping. The temperature dropped again, and this time, Lisa watched it happen. The condensation in the air thickened, became visible, became something that moved with intention rather than atmospheric pressure. The fog rose from the ground like it was being exhaled. Lisa pulled her flashlight from her belt, even though sunset was still 40 minutes away. The beam cut through the fog and revealed a second tree covered in symbols, and a third and a fourth. They formed a path or a boundary, she couldn't tell which. She followed them because turning back meant acknowledging what she'd already recognized about the spacing, the precision, the fact that Drake had clearly made these markings. He'd been trying to contain something, or trying to mark something so he wouldn't lose it. At 0.71 miles, Lisa found Drake's backpack. It sat propped against a nurse log, zippers open, contents scattered, a camelback water bladder, empty. energy bar wrappers, a trail map of Olympic National Park with specific areas circled in red, a moleskin notebook, pages dense with handwriting, a photograph in a plastic sleeve. Lisa picked up the photograph first, hands shaking inside her gloves. It showed a young Japanese couple standing in front of a torii gate, 1960s fashion and color processing. The woman wore a traditional kimono, the man a Western suit. They were smiling. On the back, someone had written in careful English, Hanako and Kenji, Kyoto, 1964. The notebook was worse. Lisa flipped through pages of research notes, printed articles taped in, hand-drawn diagrams. Drake had spent months researching yurei, Japanese ghosts, vengeful spirits, the dead who died with such intense emotion that they couldn't pass on. He'd documented different types. Onryo were the most dangerous, spirits who died with hatred or rage, bound to earth until they completed their vengeance. One page was titled, Hanako's Story, according to Jen. The handwriting became cramped, urgent. Grandmother never believed it was an accident. Kenji was experienced hiker, knew the forest, had no reason to go off trail alone. She found his body 3 days after he disappeared. Authorities said he fell, but Hanako said his face looked wrong. Terrified, like he'd seen something that killed him from fear alone. She tried to tell them about the woman in white she'd seen in their hotel room the night before his death, but no one listened. American wife. Jealous of Japanese wife. Died in 1962. Hanako was pregnant when Kenji died. She raised Patricia alone, never remarried, spoke Japanese to her daughter so Kenji's language wouldn't die with him. She believed until her last day that an Onryo killed her husband. The next pages detailed Drake's theory. What if Hanako was right? What if something had been waiting in these woods since 1962, sustained by rage and possessiveness? What if Kenji Yamamoto hadn't been killed by terrain but by a predecessor, by someone who died consumed with jealousy over another woman's marriage? The final pages were dated 2 weeks ago, written on site. I found where it happened. GPS coordinates match the historical records within 50 yards. The forest feels different here. Wrong. Cold even though it's September. I'm going to try something. If Jen's grandmother was right, if there really is an Onryo bound here, then maybe I can help it move on. The research says you have to address the source of their rage, acknowledge what was done to them, make it right. I'm going to try. The entry ended mid-sentence. Lisa's radio crackled. She grabbed it, but instead of Morrison's voice, she heard Japanese. A woman speaking rapidly, the same voice from Drake's voicemail. Lisa didn't understand the words, but her body understood the emotion. Grief so profound it had curdled into something else, something that wore grief's face while hiding sharper teeth. "Who is this?" Lisa whispered into the radio. The Japanese stopped. Silence. Then, in perfect English with no accent, "You brought him here." Lisa's throat closed. "Who?" "You brought the other one. 4 years ago. You brought him into my forest, and then you left him here. With me." David Chen. She was talking about David Chen. "I didn't..." Lisa's voice broke. "I tried to find him. I searched for weeks." "I know." The voice carried something that might have been pity in another context, from another mouth. "I watched you searching. I watched you breaking. It was beautiful. Almost as beautiful as his fear when he realized you'd never find him. Almost as beautiful as what I've made him into." The fog thickened until Lisa couldn't see 5 feet in any direction. Shapes moved in it. Human-sized, white, their movements too smooth, too fluid, like footage played in reverse. "He stays with me now," the voice continued. "He understands what it means to be abandoned, what it means to wait and never have anyone come for you. This other one, Drake, he came looking for answers about my Kenji. Foolish. But he gave me something useful before the fear took him. He told me about you, about how you'd come looking if he disappeared, about how you never stopped looking for the other one." Lisa's Glock was in her hand. She didn't remember drawing it. The barrel shook, pointing at fog. "I want you to understand something." The voice was closer now, intimate, like a whisper directly into Lisa's ear even though nothing visible stood beside her. Your guilt makes you easy. Your grief makes you predictable. You can't save them because saving them would mean admitting you failed before. And you can't admit that. So you'll keep coming here, keep searching, keep bringing me your grief until it's ripe enough to harvest. The fog parted. David Chen stood 20 feet away. He looked exactly as he had 4 years ago. 32, fit, dark hair cropped military short, the North Face jacket Lisa had given him for his birthday. He was smiling. The same easy smile that had convinced Lisa she might be capable of happiness again after her divorce, that the world contained more than procedural safety checks and lonely nights in ranger stations. "Lisa," he said, and his voice was perfect. Exactly right. The slight roughness from when he'd coached Little League and shouted encouragement until he went hoarse. "You found me." Every protocol, every training session, every rational thought in Lisa's mind screamed that this wasn't real. David Chen's body had never been found, but that didn't mean he was standing in front of her now, preserved perfectly, smiling like no time had passed. Lisa's finger rested on the Glock's trigger. "You're not him." "I'm exactly him." David took a step closer. Same memories, same feelings. "I remember the last thing I said to you before I left that morning. I said, don't worry. It's just a routine trail inspection. I said I'd be back by dinner. I remember you kissed me and told me to be careful, and I remember thinking how lucky I was that you worried about me, that someone finally worried about me." "Stop." Lisa's voice was ragged. "I remember getting turned around in the fog. I remember my GPS acting strange, coordinates shifting even when I stood still. I remember the cold, and then I remember her. The woman in white. She spoke Japanese at first, then English, and she told me what she was, what she'd been for 46 years, what I was going to become." The thing wearing David's face smiled wider. "She kept me conscious for all of it, Lisa. Every day, every hour. 4 years of understanding exactly what was happening, unable to scream, unable to die properly, just existing in the space between. And you know what the worst part was?" Lisa was backing away, her boots catching on roots and moss. The fog followed, closing distance. "The worst part was knowing you'd come looking, knowing you'd search and tear yourself apart with guilt. Because that's who you are, Lisa. That's what makes you special. You don't give up, even when giving up would be mercy, for you and for whatever you're trying to save." The thing that wasn't David lunged. Lisa fired 3 times. The shots were impossibly loud in the silent forest, and she watched the bullets pass through David's chest and exit his back with no resistance, no blood, no impact. He kept coming, and his hands were too cold. Not cold like dead flesh, but cold like the absolute absence of heat, like void given form. They closed around Lisa's throat, and she felt her body temperature plummet, felt frost forming on her skin, felt her lungs seizing. "Join us," David's mouth said. But the voice was the woman's from the radio, speaking through him like a ventriloquist. "Stay here. Understand what we understand. Feel what we feel. Love what we love." Lisa's vision grayed at the edges. Her Glock fell from nerveless fingers. Somewhere distant, her training whispered instructions about hypothermia, about cold water drowning, about how the body shut down in stages. This was faster. This was her body forgetting how to be warm, how to be alive, how to be anything except another piece of the forest collection. The last thing she saw before consciousness fled was not David's face, but something behind it. Visible through the translucent mask, a woman's face, Asian features, long black hair hanging lank and wet, a white kimono stained with something dark, and eyes that held no humanity at all, just rage purified into purpose. Then nothing. Lisa woke to gray light and pain. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed broken glass. Her body ached with deep tissue cold, the kind that had settled into bones and wouldn't leave. She was lying on her back, staring up through the rainforest canopy at a sky the color of old ice. Her watch read 6:47 a.m. She'd lost 14 hours. Lisa sat up slowly, every muscle protesting. Her gear was scattered around her, GPS blinking a low battery warning, radio smashed, Glock lying 10 feet away. The forest was still silent. The fog had thinned but not dissipated, hovering at ankle height like a living carpet. Drake's notebook lay open beside her, pinned down with a river stone. Someone had written a new entry in handwriting that matched the earlier pages, but the ink was darker, fresher. Lisa Hoffman, you lasted longer than most. Strong, stubborn, broken in the right ways. But you understand now, don't you? There's no rescue, there's no closure. There's only the forest and the ones it keeps and the ones who keep coming back looking for them. You'll search for Drake because you have to. You'll find evidence, traces, just enough to keep you hoping, just enough to bring you back, again and again, until one night you don't leave, until the cold becomes permanent, until you become one more thing I use to hurt the next person who comes searching. David sends his regards. Drake is learning to do the same. We'll all be waiting when you return. The entry was signed in Japanese characters Lisa couldn't read. She stood on shaking legs, gathered what gear still functioned, and started walking back toward the trailhead. The forest didn't stop her. The fog parted with each step, almost polite, like a host showing a guest to the door. Her truck was where she'd left it, covered in dew. The drive back to the ranger station took 20 minutes of white-knuckled focus, watching the road while her peripheral vision filled with shapes that might be fog, might be trees, might be women in white kimonos standing between the spruces. At the station, Morrison was waiting, her face gray with exhaustion. "Hoffman, where the hell have you been? We've had search teams out since midnight." "Equipment failure," Lisa heard herself say. The lie came easily, automatically. GPS died. Had to wait for daylight to navigate back. Morrison studied her for a long moment, and Lisa saw the calculation happening behind her supervisor's eyes. The cost of pushing this, the paperwork involved, the questions that would need answers Lisa couldn't provide without sounding insane. "Get checked by medical," Morrison finally said. "Then file your report. We're suspending the search for Drake. Seattle PD is classifying it as a voluntary missing person. He had severe depression, history of suicidal ideation. They think he came out here to..." She didn't finish. Lisa nodded, filed the report in mechanical prose that described equipment failures and zero evidence, and recommended search suspension, submitted to the medical check that found mild hypothermia and contusions consistent with a fall, drove to her rental house in Forks, took a shower hot enough to turn her skin red, and didn't scream when the water temperature fluctuated cold and she saw shapes moving in the steam. She didn't scream, but she stopped sleeping. 3 days later, a hiker found one of Drake's hiking boots at the base of a waterfall, 30 miles from where Lisa had searched. The discovery renewed the official search for another week. They found nothing else. On day 8, the case was closed. Drake joined the list of people who walked into Olympic National Park and never walked out. A list longer than most tourists realized, names going back decades, disappearances clustering around certain areas in patterns the Park Service tracked but never publicized. Lisa requested those historical records, cross-referenced them with weather data, folklore, incidents of reported paranormal activity in the region. The patterns were there if you wanted to see them. Spikes every 7 to 10 years, concentrated in old-growth areas, predominantly male victims ages 28 to 45. The clusters started in 1962. She found one report from 1968, barely a paragraph, about rangers investigating reports of a woman in traditional Japanese clothing seen in the Hoh rainforest. The sighting was dismissed as misidentification. The report was filed by a ranger named Michael Reeves, who'd later died in a hiking accident in 1976. His body had been found with an expression witnesses described as terrified beyond description. Lisa made a map, marked every disappearance, every sighting, every death ruled accidental that showed signs of extreme fear. The map looked like a spider's web, threads connecting across decades, all converging on a 3-mile radius in the old-growth forest where Kenji Yamamoto had died in 1967, where something had been waiting since 1962, where David Chen and Nathan Drake now waited with it. Lisa knew she should leave. Transfer to another park, another state. Put as much distance between herself and Olympic as possible. She filled out the paperwork twice. Never submitted it. Because late at night, when the station's heating clicked off and the temperature dropped and the fog pressed against her windows like it wanted inside, Lisa heard them. David's voice. Drake's voice. Others she didn't recognize, speaking Japanese, speaking English, speaking languages she couldn't identify. They called to her, reminded her of everything she'd failed to do, everyone she'd failed to save, invited her back to the forest, promised her understanding, promised her community, promised her an end to the guilt that had been eating her alive since the morning David Chen didn't come back from a routine trail inspection, promised her that the cold would eventually stop hurting. Lisa stood at her window watching fog crawl through the streets of Forks like a living thing searching for a way inside, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would go back. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. Because that's what the forest had made her into. Not a ranger, not a rescuer, but another piece of bait. Another lure for the next person who'd come searching. Another voice to add to the chorus that called from the old-growth darkness. The Onryo had been right about one thing. Lisa couldn't give up. Not on David, not on Drake, not on any of them. Her inability to quit wasn't strength. It was the crack in her foundation that something ancient and patient and infinitely cruel had learned to exploit. She would go back to the forest. She would search. She would find just enough evidence to keep hoping. Just enough to justify one more trip into the old growth. One more attempt to bring someone home. And one night, the fog wouldn't part. The cold wouldn't be temporary. The voices wouldn't just be calling her back. They'd be teaching her the words to call others forward. Lisa understood this with the same certainty she understood her own name. Understanding changed nothing. She pulled on her jacket, checked her gear by habit even though it was midnight and raining and every protocol screamed at her to wait for daylight. The Garmin GPS showed a waypoint she didn't remember marking. Coordinates in the old-growth forest labeled simply, David. Lisa grabbed her keys, started her truck, drove toward the Ho River trailhead while the radio whispered in Japanese and something in the passenger seat that looked like empty air felt colder than the night outside. The forest was waiting. It was always waiting, and somewhere in its moss-draped depths, David Chen was waiting too, learning to smile the way the woman in white smiled, learning to speak with her voice, learning to be the next thing that would destroy whoever came looking for Lisa Hoffman when she inevitably failed to return. The cycle was perfect. The cycle was eternal. The cycle was fed by love and grief and the human inability to let go. Lisa drove into the darkness, and the darkness welcomed her home. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The thermometer read -47 degrees Fahrenheit, but the snow was melting. Lisa Hoffman checked the reading 3 times, her breath crystallizing instantly in the March air. The digital thermometer was new, calibrated 2 weeks ago at the Park Service Lab in Anchorage. Margin of error, 0.3 degrees. She checked her backup analog thermometer, -46. Then her infrared gun, -48. All 3 instruments agreed. The temperature at the Savage River Patrol cabin was cold enough to freeze diesel fuel solid. But the snow around Lucas Webb's abandoned snowmobile was melting into slush. Lisa knelt beside the machine, her insulated gloves sinking into water that should have been ice. Steam rose from the puddle, visible in her headlamp's beam. She pressed her thermometer probe into the liquid, 34 degrees Fahrenheit, above freezing. Impossible. Thermodynamics didn't work like this. Heat didn't spontaneously generate in sub-zero environments. Energy required a source, combustion, friction, radiation, something. Lisa found nothing. Just melted snow in a perfect circle 15 feet in diameter, centered on Lucas's Polaris snowmobile. She'd been a ranger with the National Park Service for 6 years, the last 3 at Denali. She had a master's degree in environmental science from UC Davis. She understood heat transfer, energy conservation, atmospheric physics. She'd written her thesis on permafrost degradation in Arctic climates. This violated every principle in that thesis. Lucas Webb had been missing for 36 hours. Last contact, Aero 800 hours, March 14, 2008, checking in via satellite phone from his position at mile marker 42 on the Park Road. He'd been conducting the annual Winter Wildlife Survey, documenting caribou populations in the Savage River watershed, routine work. Solo patrol, standard for experienced rangers during the quiet season. He'd missed his 1800 hours check-in, then his 800 the next morning. When he failed to return to headquarters by noon yesterday, Lisa had volunteered for the search and rescue mission. Now she stood in impossible snowmelt, staring at Lucas's abandoned equipment. The snowmobile's engine was cold, dead cold, matching ambient temperature. She checked anyway, pulling her glove off long enough to touch the hood. Her skin stuck instantly, tearing when she pulled away. Definitely cold, definitely not the heat source. Lisa examined the machine methodically. Tank, 3/4 full. Oil, normal level. No mechanical failure evident. The key was missing from the ignition. Lucas's day pack was gone. His emergency kit remained strapped to the rear cargo rack, untouched. He'd left deliberately, on foot, in negative 40-degree weather. That was suicide. Lisa had seen enough cold weather fatalities to know the timeline. Exposed skin freezes in 5 minutes. Frostbite sets in immediately. Core temperature drops 1 degree every 10 minutes without proper insulation. Confusion begins around 94 degrees. Loss of consciousness at 86. Death shortly after. Lucas was experienced. He knew the risks. He wouldn't abandon a working snowmobile unless something had forced him. Lisa stood, scanning the area with her headlamp. The Savage River Valley stretched around her, a white expanse broken by stunted black spruce and willow thickets. Denali itself loomed to the southwest, invisible in the darkness, but present, like a held breath. The mountain dominated everything, even when you couldn't see it. March in the Alaska Range meant 20 hours of darkness. Lisa's headlamp carved a small sphere of visibility from the infinite black. Beyond that sphere, nothing, just cold and emptiness and the occasional crack of ice contracting in the extreme temperature. She found the first track at the edge of the melt circle. Footprint, boot tread. Lisa recognized the pattern. Baffin impacts, the same winter boots she wore. Lucas's size, men's 11. The print pointed northwest, toward the Sanctuary River drainage. Deeper wilderness, no shelters, no cabins, no roads for 50 miles. The track was filled with water. Lisa stared. The footprint sat in snow that should have been frozen solid, but instead held liquid water pooled in the depression. She touched it. Warm, bathwater warm. She jerked her hand back, ice particles forming instantly on her wet glove. She followed the tracks. Every footprint held the same impossible warmth. Every step Lucas had taken radiated heat that physics couldn't explain. The trail led northwest in a straight line, unwavering, purposeful. Not the wandering path of someone lost or confused, direct, like he knew exactly where he was going, like something was pulling him. Lisa documented everything with her digital camera. Photographs of the melt circle, close-ups of the warm footprints, temperature readings from her thermometers. Evidence that would look insane to anyone who hadn't seen it personally. Evidence that violated natural law. She was a scientist. She dealt in observable phenomena, measurable data, reproducible results. This was none of those things. But it was real. Lisa reached for her satellite phone. Protocol required immediate reporting of any SAR developments. She'd call headquarters, describe what she'd found, request additional personnel for the search. No signal. She checked the phone's display. Full battery. Clear view of southern sky where satellites should be visible. Signal strength? 0. That shouldn't be possible with Iridium's constellation. The system was designed for polar coverage specifically because traditional cell networks failed at these latitudes. Lisa tried 3 more times. Nothing. She was 12 miles from headquarters. The park road was theoretically open, though unplowed and dangerous in winter. She could follow it back, report in person, wait for backup. Standard procedure when communications failed. Or she could follow Lucas's tracks while they were still visible. The scientist in Lisa said retreat. Gather resources. Approach the problem systematically with adequate support. But the ranger in her, the part that had taken an oath to preserve and protect, saw those warm footprints leading into darkness, and knew waiting might mean finding Lucas's frozen body instead of Lucas himself. She made her decision. Lisa returned to her snowmobile, grabbed her emergency pack and checked her supplies. Headlamp with spare batteries, GPS unit, satellite phone. Useless, but she took it anyway. First aid kit, fire starter, emergency shelter, 3 days of food, 2 liters of water. Her service weapon, a Glock 22, rode on her hip, more psychological comfort than practical tool. What did you shoot in -40-degree darkness? She left a note attached to Lucas's snowmobile, describing her direction and intentions. If she didn't return, at least the next search team would know where to start looking for 2 bodies instead of 1. The tracks led her into the spruce forest. Lisa followed them with her headlamp, the beam catching snow crystals that glittered like shattered glass. The trees closed around her, stunted and twisted by permafrost and wind. They grew in strange patterns here, branches reaching in directions that seemed to defy gravity. Lisa had always attributed it to wind stress and soil conditions. Now she wasn't sure. The warm footprints continued, perfectly spaced, inhumanly regular. Lisa measured the stride length, 43 inches. That was long, unnaturally long for Lucas, who stood 5'10". She was watching someone run, or something with longer legs than human proportions allowed. Her scientific training screamed for rational explanation. Maybe Lucas had been running. Maybe fear or adrenaline had lengthened his stride. Maybe. The trees ended abruptly. Lisa stopped at the forest edge, her headlamp illuminating something that made her breath catch. A clearing stretched before her, perhaps 200 feet across. Snow covered it in an unbroken expanse except for one feature. Bodies. No, not bodies. The shapes were wrong. Lisa forced herself forward, every instinct screaming retreat. Her headlamp revealed the truth in fragments. Caribou carcasses. 7 of them, arranged in a perfect circle. Each animal had been gutted with surgical precision. Organs removed. Rib cages spread open like wings. But no blood. The snow around them was white, pristine. No evidence of the violent deaths these wounds suggested. Lisa's hands shook as she photographed the scene. This wasn't predation. Bears were hibernating. Wolves left evidence, tracks, scattered remains. This was deliberate, ritualistic, human. But who would do this 12 miles into wilderness, in -40-degree darkness, with the nearest road barely passable? Lucas's tracks led directly to the circle's center. Lisa followed them, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The footprints stopped at the exact geometric middle of the caribou arrangement. Not near the center, exactly at it, like Lucas had measured. No tracks led out. Lisa spun in a circle, scanning with her headlamp. 7 caribou carcasses forming a perfect ring. Lucas's footprints leading in, nothing leading out. The snow beyond was undisturbed, no indication anyone had left this clearing. Impossible. People didn't vanish. Mass couldn't be created or destroyed, only transformed. Every action had equal and opposite reaction. These were fundamental laws. This clearing didn't care about laws. Lisa's thermometer registered -43 degrees, but the caribou organs, what remained of them, steamed in the cold. She approached the nearest carcass, morbid curiosity overriding revulsion. The animal's heart was missing, removed so cleanly the surrounding tissue showed almost no damage. She touched the exposed tissue with her thermometer probe. 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Body temperature, human body temperature, maintained in a dead animal that had been exposed to deadly cold for unknown hours. Thermodynamically impossible. Lisa backed away, her scientific worldview fracturing. She'd seen strange phenomena before. Aurora borealis that seemed to pulse with consciousness, ice formations that defied crystal structure, weather patterns that local indigenous guides called spirits walking. She'd always found rational explanations, always. This had no rational explanation. Her headlamp flickered. Lisa tapped it. Fresh batteries, no reason for failure. The light steadied, then died completely. She stood in absolute darkness, broken only by starlight reflecting off snow. Her backup flashlight was in her pack. She reached for it with hands that trembled for more than cold. Something moved in the trees. Lisa froze, listening. Sound traveled strangely in extreme cold, muffled, distorted. But she definitely heard movement. Footsteps, heavy, getting closer. Lucas? Her voice cracked. Lucas Webb? The footsteps stopped. Lisa fumbled her flashlight from her pack, clicked it on. The beam was weaker than her headlamp, but sufficient. She swept it across the tree line. Nothing. But the air had changed. The temperature was rising. She felt it through her insulated layers. Not warming exactly, just less aggressively cold. Like something large and warm was nearby, radiating heat. Her thermometer confirmed it. -38 degrees. 5 degrees warmer than 2 minutes ago. "This is Ranger Hoffman with the National Park Service," Lisa called, forcing authority into her voice. "Identify yourself." Movement again. Not footsteps this time. Something dragging, scraping across frozen ground. Lisa's training said stand your ground, establish authority, maintain control of the situation. Her instincts said run. She compromised by backing away slowly, keeping her flashlight trained on the trees. Her hand found her Glock, thumb releasing the safety strap. Procedure said weapons were last resort. Procedure was written for human threats. This didn't feel human. A shape emerged from the spruce forest. Lisa's flashlight caught it in fragments. Too tall, too thin, moving wrong. It walked on 2 legs, but the joints bent at angles that made her eyes hurt. The limbs were elongated, stretched, like something had taken human proportions and pulled them taffy thin. Antlers crowned its head. Massive. Caribou antlers, but wrong. Growing from a skull that was almost human in shape but covered in something that looked like frozen flesh, gray-white and crystalline. The thing that had been Lucas Webb turned its head toward her light. Lisa ran. Training, protocol, procedure, all of it evaporated. She ran like prey, flashlight beam bouncing wildly, pack hammering against her back. Behind her, pursuit. She heard it. Impossibly fast footsteps, the crack of breaking branches, a sound that might have been breathing but sounded more like wind through a cave. The spruce forest swallowed her. Lisa dodged trees, her lungs burning from cold air drawn too fast. Ice formed in her nostrils, her throat. She couldn't maintain this pace. Hypoxia and hypothermia would kill her as surely as whatever followed. She needed shelter. Fire. A defensible position. The sanctuary river cabin was 8 miles northeast, too far. But there were emergency caches scattered throughout the park. Minimal supplies, basic shelter. The nearest was... Lisa's mind raced through mental maps, GPS coordinates memorized from years of patrols. Toklat River Junction. 4 miles. She could make 4 miles, if the thing behind her allowed it. Lisa risked a glance backward. Her flashlight showed nothing but trees and darkness. The pursuit sounds had stopped. She slowed, gasping, every breath a knife in her chest. Silence. She stood in the forest alone. Her flashlight revealed normal winter wilderness. Snow, spruce, ice. No monsters, no impossible anatomy. Just cold and emptiness. Lisa's scientific training reasserted itself. Hypothermia caused hallucinations. She'd been in extreme cold for hours. Stress, exhaustion, oxygen deprivation, all could produce vivid delusions. The thing she thought she'd seen was probably Lucas, delirious from exposure, his features distorted by shadow and fear. She almost believed it. Then she saw the trees. Every spruce in a 30-foot radius had been stripped of bark. Not by animals. The marks were too uniform, too deliberate. long, vertical gouges, as if something with clawed hands had scraped away the bark in methodical patterns. Lisa approached the nearest tree, touching the exposed wood. It was warm, not just warm, hot. Her fingers came away sticky with sap that should have been frozen solid. The gouges formed symbols. Lisa's breath stopped. She recognized them from anthropology courses, from cultural sensitivity training the Park Service required. Algonquian pictographs, specifically Cree, she thought, though her knowledge was limited. The symbols depicted a figure, elongated, crowned with antlers. Around it, smaller human figures running, being pursued, being consumed. Wendigo. The word surfaced from memory, from stories shared by indigenous rangers during quiet night shifts. Legends of winter spirits, hunger made manifest. Humans transformed by cannibalism into something no longer human, forever starving, forever hunting, forever cold, despite burning from within. Lisa had categorized those stories as folklore, cultural mythology. Interesting from an anthropological perspective, but not literal truth. The hot sap on her fingers suggested otherwise. Her thermometer registered negative 35 degrees. Still rising. Something was approaching, radiating heat that violated thermodynamic principles. Lisa's scientific mind screamed for rational explanation, while her primate hindbrain screamed simply to run. She chose a middle ground. Strategic retreat with documentation. Lisa photographed the symbols, the stripped bark, the temperature readings. If she survived, she'd need proof. Evidence that what she experienced was real, not hypothermia-induced delusion. Her camera's flash illuminated the forest in stark bursts of white light. In the third flash, she saw it again. Closer this time, 20 feet away. Standing motionless between two spruce trees. The creature was 7 feet tall, possibly more. Its proportions were human-adjacent, but stretched, attenuated. Arms too long, reaching past where knees should be. Legs backward jointed, like digitigrade animal limbs. The torso was emaciated, ribs visible through translucent flesh that looked like ice given human form. The head bore Lucas Webb's face, not wearing it, not like a mask. His actual face, frozen in expression of terminal hunger, eyes black from edge to edge. Mouth open, revealing teeth that had grown into fangs, not replaced by fangs, but actual human teeth extended and sharpened. The antlers were caribou, yes, but growing directly from Lucas's skull. Not attached. Integrated. As if the bone had sprouted natural horn. The thing that had been Lucas Webb took one step forward. The snow beneath its foot melted instantly, steaming. Lisa smelled something acrid, burning hair, scorched meat. The Wendigo burned with impossible internal heat while its flesh remained frozen solid. "Lucas!" Lisa forced the words out. "Lucas, I know you're in there. I know you can hear me. Fight this." The creature tilted its head, almost curious, almost human. Then it smiled. The smile was worst part. Recognition, intelligence, awareness. This thing knew exactly what it was doing. It wasn't some mindless monster. It was Lucas Webb, transformed and aware and absolutely consumed by hunger that could never be satisfied. It opened its mouth and spoke with Lucas's voice, distorted by the wrong mouth shape. "Run." Then it lunged. Lisa ran. Pure terror propelled her. No strategy, no plan, just desperate flight. The Wendigo pursued, impossibly fast. She heard it behind her, gaining. Its footsteps melted snow with each impact, leaving a trail of steam and exposed earth. A spruce branch caught Lisa's pack, spinning her sideways. She stumbled, fell, rolled. Her flashlight went flying. Darkness consumed everything except starlight on snow. The Wendigo loomed above her, silhouetted against the sky. Lisa's hand found her Glock, pulled it free, fired 3 times at center mass. The bullets passed through, not like shooting flesh, like shooting mist. The rounds exited the creature's back without resistance, without impact. The Wendigo didn't even flinch. It reached for her with hands that had too many joints. Lisa rolled, kicked, scrambled backward. Her hand touched something metal, her flashlight. She grabbed it, swung it like a club. The beam caught the Wendigo's face full on. It recoiled. Actually recoiled, stepping back, raising an arm against the light. Lisa kept the beam trained on it, backing away. The creature hissed, a sound like water hitting hot metal. Steam rose from its flesh where the light touched. Light hurt it. Somehow, artificial light caused pain or discomfort or something that made it retreat. Lisa had one flashlight, one headlamp, and about 4 hours of battery life total. Then she'd be in darkness with a thing that could run indefinitely and couldn't be shot. The Wendigo circled, staying just beyond her flashlight's effective range. Testing, probing for weakness. Intelligence gleamed in those black eyes. It was learning. Lisa needed shelter. The emergency cache was still miles away. Her snowmobile was 12 miles back the way she'd come. The nearest staffed facility was headquarters, 35 miles by Park Road. She was going to die out here. The rational part of her brain that had gotten her through graduate school, through field research in hostile environments, through 6 years of backcountry emergencies, started calculating survival probabilities. Result, less than 5% chance. Unless she gave the Wendigo what it wanted. The thought came unbidden. Horrible. It wanted food. Specifically, it wanted human flesh. The curse of Wendigo transformation was eternal hunger that could only be temporarily satisfied by cannibalism. Every story agreed on that detail. Lisa had food in her pack. Not human flesh, but no, absolutely not. She was still thinking rationally, which meant she wasn't yet desperate enough to consider appeasing a monster with meat. But she was getting there. The Wendigo spoke again, Lucas's voice emerging from that terrible mouth. So hungry. Always hungry. Can't stop. Can't think about anything else. Just hunger. Fight it, Lucas, Lisa said, keeping her flashlight steady. You're still human. You can resist. No. The thing that was Lucas shook its head, antlers scraping against spruce branches. No more Lucas. Just hunger. Just need. Just consumption. It lunged again, faster than before. Lisa barely got her light up in time. The beam caught the Wendigo mid-leap. It screamed, a sound that was definitely not human, not animal, something else entirely. The scream echoed off Mount McKinley, bouncing back distorted. Other screams answered. Lisa's blood went cold. Multiple voices scattered across the valley. How many? 3? 5? More? How many people had Lucas been in contact with before his transformation? How many had he infected? The Wendigo circling her smiled Lucas's terrible smile. Not alone, it said. Never alone. We are legion. Then they came from the trees. 5 of them. No, 6. All in various stages of transformation. Some still mostly human, flesh not yet crystallized. Others fully changed. Monstrous and beautiful and absolutely wrong. Lisa recognized one. Sarah Chen, a seasonal ranger who'd gone missing 2 weeks ago during a solo ski patrol. Her Wendigo form was fresh, newly transformed. She still wore torn fragments of her NPS uniform. They surrounded Lisa in a loose circle, staying just beyond her flashlight's reach, studying her. Hungry. The thing that was Lucas raised a hand. The others stopped. Some hierarchy existed among them. Lucas was oldest, most transformed. Alpha predator. We don't want to hurt you, Lucas said, and Lisa believed him. Not from mercy, from calculation. The Wendigos wanted her transformed, not dead. Another member of their hunting pack. How? Lisa asked, stalling. How did this happen? Lucas tilted his head. Found something. In the ice. Old. Buried for centuries. We uncovered it during a survey. Looked like bone. Felt warm. Permafrost degradation. Lisa's thesis topic. As the planet warmed, Ancient ice melted, releasing things that had been frozen for millennia. Bacteria, viruses, and apparently, other things. "The bone infected you," Lisa said. "The bone woke hunger we'd always hidden, showed us truth. Civilization is lie, society is cage. We are predators pretending to be prey." Lucas's voice held conviction, zealot fervor. "You feel it too. Why else come into darkness alone? Why else follow instead of retreat?" He wasn't entirely wrong. Lisa had chosen pursuit over safety, had chosen to track Lucas instead of waiting for backup. Some part of her had wanted this, wanted to face the unknown, to push past safe boundaries. But not like this. Not transformation into a hunger that could never be satisfied. "I'm leaving," Lisa said, backing away. Her flashlight beam swept across 6 Wendigos, holding them at bay. "You can stay here. Hunt caribou. Stay away from humans. I won't report this." Lie. Total lie. But Wendigos had been human once. Maybe they understood lies, maybe they'd let her go. Lucas laughed. "You can't leave. You know too much. You've seen us. You'll talk. They'll send hunters, scientists. They'll find the bone, study it, lock it away. So we need the bone. It calls others, spreads the truth. Every human who touches it understands. Hunger is natural. Consumption is honest. We are meant to feed." A cult. The Wendigos were a cult protecting their sacred relic. Lisa's options narrowed to one: run until her light failed, then die, or die now. Choose your death, Ranger. She chose fight. Lisa pulled an emergency flare from her pack, struck it, and threw it directly at Lucas's face. The magnesium burned at 1300 degrees Fahrenheit. The Wendigo shrieked, stumbling backward, its frozen flesh actually igniting where the flare struck. Lisa didn't wait. She ran at the gap Lucas's retreat created, flashlight in one hand, Glock in the other. Behind her, chaos. The Wendigos pursued, but the flare had disrupted their coordination. Lisa had maybe 30 seconds before they recovered. She used those seconds. The forest blurred past. Lisa's breath came in gasps that burned her throat. Ice formed in her lungs. She couldn't maintain this pace much longer. Hypothermia was setting in. She recognized the symptoms: confusion, impaired judgment, the dangerous warmth that preceded freezing to death. But that was slower than the Wendigos behind her. Ahead, a break in the trees. The Toklat River frozen solid. Beyond it, the emergency cache, shelter, fire, a chance. Lisa burst from the forest onto the riverbank. The ice stretched before her, white and smooth. She stepped onto it, praying the freeze was solid this far from spring. The ice held. Lisa ran across, her boots finding purchase on the rough surface. Halfway across, she risked a look backward. The Wendigos stood at the forest edge, not pursuing, not crossing the river. Lucas's voice called across the ice. "We'll wait. You'll freeze. You'll hunger. Then you'll understand." They knew. Knew she couldn't survive without shelter, without fire, without help that wouldn't come because her communications were down and backup didn't know where to search. Lisa reached the far bank, found the cache, a small steel box secured to a spruce tree. Inside, emergency blanket, fire starter, water purification tablets, and exactly 3 meals ready to eat. Not enough. Not for the days or weeks it might take for rescue. She could ration. Could survive maybe 5 days if she was careful. Could hike toward civilization during daylight, shelter at night. Or she could cross the river and take the bone from the Wendigos. The thought came from somewhere dark. If she had the bone, she could study it, understand it, maybe reverse the transformation, maybe find a cure, maybe succumb to the hunger herself. Lisa sat in the snow, exhausted, freezing, and forced herself to think. Really think. With the analytical mind that had earned her a master's degree and 6 years of successful field work. Facts: 6 Wendigos, probably more. Infectious agent of unknown origin. Impossible physiology violating known physical laws. Organized, Intelligent, coordinated. More facts. She was alone, low on supplies, no communications, no backup, and suffering from stage 2 hypothermia. Conclusion: survival probability approaching 0. Unless she gave up on survival and focused on documentation. Lisa pulled out her camera. Battery, 47%. She began recording video. Her voice shook from cold and fear as she described everything she'd seen. The caribou circle, Lucas's transformation, the bone buried in melting permafrost. Evidence. When they found her body, they'd find this camera. They'd know the truth. She detailed the Wendigos' behavioral patterns, their aversion to light, their coordination. She described the bone's location as best she could approximate. She recorded her own observations about climate change potentially releasing ancient pathogens or other things. Her final words: "This is Ranger Lisa Hoffman, March 16, 2008. If you're watching this, I'm dead. Don't touch the bone. Burn it. Burn everything within a mile, and whatever you do, don't come looking for me. There's nothing left to save." She turned off the camera, conserving battery. Across the river, the Wendigos watched, waiting. Lisa built a fire. The flames felt good against her numb hands. She melted snow for water, ate one MRE, and tried to form a plan that didn't end with her frozen body feeding monsters. Dawn came slowly. The sun's arrival did nothing to warm the landscape. March in Alaska was still deep winter despite lengthening daylight. But light meant the Wendigos retreated deeper into forest shadow. They hated bright light. Lisa extinguished her fire and started walking. South, following the Toklat River toward the Park Road. 30 miles minimum, 2 days if she pushed hard, 3 if she was conservative. She had supplies for 1 day. The river ice groaned beneath her feet, contracting and expanding with temperature fluctuations. Lisa walked carefully, testing each step. A fall through the ice meant death. Wet clothing in these temperatures was non-survivable. Behind her, the Wendigos followed. They stayed in the tree line, pacing her, never quite visible, but always present. Lisa heard them periodically. Footsteps, breath, the sound of breaking branches. They were hurting her, driving her toward exhaustion. By noon, Lisa was stumbling. Hypothermia was winning. Her thoughts fragmented, scattered. She kept walking because stopping meant death, but her body was shutting down. She didn't see the crevasse until she fell into it. Lisa dropped 6 feet onto ice-covered rocks, her pack breaking the fall but her ankle twisting badly. Pain shot through her leg. She tried to stand, fell again. Above, the crevasse opening, a slash of white sky against black rock. Below, darkness extending into the earth. She'd fallen into a lava tube. Denali's geology included volcanic features from millions of years past. The tube extended into the mountain carved by ancient magma flows. Lisa pulled out her flashlight. The beam revealed a tunnel stretching into darkness. And something else. Bones. Human bones. Dozens of skeletons scattered across the tunnel floor. Some recent, flesh still clinging to ribs. Others ancient, reduced to fragments. This was a Wendigo feeding ground. Lisa's radio crackled. She stared at it. The satellite phone had been dead for 36 hours. Now suddenly, inside a lava tube buried in the earth, it was receiving signal. The voice that emerged wasn't dispatch, wasn't human. "Hello, Lisa." Her own voice. The Wendigos had learned to mimic her perfectly. Lisa turned off the radio. Her hands shook violently. Hypothermia was critical now. She had maybe an hour before loss of consciousness. She pulled out her emergency blanket, wrapped it around herself, and tried to think through the fog in her brain. The Wendigos were above. The tunnel extended below. She could stay here and freeze, could try climbing out and face the monsters, or could explore deeper, into unknown darkness. Lisa chose darkness. She limped into the tunnel, flashlight illuminating ancient rock. The passage descended at a gentle grade, leading deeper into the mountain. Temperature increased slightly. Geothermal heat, maybe. Not enough to save her, but enough to delay the inevitable. The tunnel opened into a chamber. Lisa stopped, awed despite her dying brain. The chamber was massive, cathedral-sized, carved from basalt by ancient volcanic forces. And in the center, embedded in stone, the bone. It was huge. Femur, she thought, but from what animal she couldn't identify. Too large for caribou, too strange in proportion. The bone was dark, almost black, with patterns that might have been natural grain or might have been carved symbols. Heat radiated from it. Lisa felt warmth for the first time in hours. Her frozen fingers began to thaw painfully. The bone was beautiful. Lisa approached it knowing she shouldn't, unable to stop. This was what had infected Lucas and the others. This was the source. Patient zero for a plague that transformed humans into eternal hunger. She should destroy it, smash it, prevent further infection. But it was so warm, and she was so cold, and hunger gnawed at her stomach despite the MRE she'd eaten hours ago. Lisa touched the bone. Understanding flooded her. Not infection, revelation. The bone didn't create hunger. It revealed hunger that had always existed. The truth that civilization buried: humans were predators. Apex predators. They'd conquered the world through willingness to consume anything, anyone. The Wendigo curse wasn't transformation. It was remembering. Remembering that cooperation was temporary alliance, that morality was convenient fiction, that deep down, every human was alone, starving, desperate to feed on whatever they could take. Lisa pulled her hand away. The knowledge remained, burning in her mind. She understood the Wendigos now, understood Lucas's smile. They were honest in their hunger. She was lying to herself about hers. No. Lisa backed away from the bone, forcing her scientific mind to reassert control. This was infection. Psychological manipulation. The bone, whatever it was, affected human cognition, created delusions of justified consumption. She wouldn't succumb. You can't resist. Lucas's voice echoed through the chamber. The Wendigos had followed her down. 6 of them emerged from the tunnel, surrounding the bone, protecting it. "Watch me," Lisa said. She pulled out her remaining flares, struck all 3 at once and threw them at the bone. The magnesium ignited in a blinding flash. Lisa closed her eyes, backing toward the wall. Heat washed over her. The bone was burning, actually burning, screaming with voices that weren't sound but felt like sound anyway. The Wendigos shrieked, rushing to protect their relic. Lucas reached the bone first, grabbed it with burning hands, pulled it from the flames. His flesh ignited. The Wendigo transformation wasn't just psychological, it was physical, and the physical component was fuel. Lucas burned like a torch, the frozen flesh that had somehow generated heat now consumed by it. He screamed, not in pain but in rage, as his body dissolved into ash. The other Wendigos watched him burn. Then they looked at Lisa. Sarah Chen spoke. "You killed him." "I killed a monster," Lisa said. "Lucas died when he touched that bone." "We all died when we touched the bone," Sarah said. "But we were reborn honest. You're still lying to yourself." "Maybe. Probably. But lies were what kept civilization running. Lies like, people are basically good, and cooperation benefits everyone, and we're better than our base instincts." Lisa believed those lies, chose to believe them, even knowing they were lies. "I'm leaving," she said. "Keep your bone. Stay in this tunnel. Hunt caribou. I won't tell anyone." She meant it this time. Let the Wendigos have their cave, their relic, their honest hunger, as long as they stayed away from humans. Sarah studied her with black eyes, then nodded. "Go. But when you're alone, when you're hungry, when you realize civilization is cage, remember we're here. Remember there's another way." Lisa limped past them, back through the tunnel, toward the crevasse. The climb out with a twisted ankle was agony. She barely made it, collapsing on the ice above. Dawn had become afternoon, The sun hung low on the southern horizon. Lisa forced herself upright, started walking again. South, always south, toward the road, toward rescue, toward the comfortable lies that let people sleep at night. She found the park road after 2 more days of walking. A maintenance crew picked her up, rushed her to the hospital in Healy. Severe hypothermia, frostbite on 3 fingers and 2 toes, malnutrition, exhaustion. They asked about Lucas Webb. Lisa told them she'd found his snowmobile abandoned. No sign of him beyond that. She'd searched until her supplies ran low, then retreated. Standard procedure when the missing person can't be located. They asked about her injuries. She said she'd fallen into a crevasse, managed to climb out, lucky to survive. They believed her, or pretended to. Hard to tell the difference. Lisa spent a week recovering, then returned to duty. She requested transfer to a different park, somewhere warm, somewhere without permafrost to melt and release ancient things. The request was denied. Personnel shortages. She was needed at Denali, so she stayed, conducted her patrols, filed her reports, maintained the comfortable lies that kept the system running. At night she dreamed of the bone, of warmth in endless cold, of hunger that could finally be acknowledged and fed. She never went back to the lava tube, never tried to destroy the bone or report the Wendigos. Some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud. Besides, she'd made a deal. They stayed in their territory. She stayed in hers. Borders respected on both sides. It worked. For a while. Then the temperature started rising. Climate change accelerating, permafrost melting faster each year. And with the melt, other bones, other relics, other things that had been buried for good reason. Lisa documented it all. Scientific reports on unusual findings, caribou die-offs with strange patterns, hikers reporting hallucinations of tall figures with antlers, each report filed properly, each one ignored or dismissed, just like she'd known they would be. Civilization ran on comfortable lies. Lisa had chosen to protect those lies, to maintain the fiction that humans were rational, moral, controllable. But every winter, when the darkness came and the cold bit deep, she remembered the bone's warmth, remembered Lucas's honest smile, remembered Sarah's offer, "There's another way." Lisa Hoffman remained human, remained a ranger, remained committed to preservation and protection. But some nights, in the deepest cold, she understood the Wendigos perfectly. And on those nights she was very, very hungry. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. William Archer found the teeth at the abandoned ranger cabin on Cutbank Creek. 37 of them, human molars and incisors, arranged in a perfect spiral on the wooden floor. He crouched beside the pattern, pulling a latex glove from his kit and carefully lifting one tooth with tweezers. Recent extraction, the root still showing traces of blood and tissue. He photographed the spiral with his iPhone, the flash creating harsh shadows that made the teeth look like they were arranged on an altar, which was ridiculous. This was evidence of something. Animal scavenging, maybe a bear that had gotten into human remains. But it wasn't ritualistic. It wasn't supernatural. William had spent 12 years as a ranger in Glacier National Park specifically because he preferred dealing with quantifiable dangers, hypothermia, avalanches, grizzly bears. Things that followed rules. That made sense. Not teeth spirals. The cabin was supposed to be empty. Cutbank Ranger Station had been decommissioned in 2009, deemed too expensive to maintain for the handful of winter hikers who used the area. William had only come up here because Madison Garcia's Subaru Outback had been found at the Cutbank trailhead 3 days ago. Engine cold, driver's door open, keys in the ignition. Her backpack was still in the passenger seat. Her phone was on the dashboard, battery dead. Everything suggested she'd gotten out of the vehicle intending to come right back. She never did. Madison Garcia, 29, environmental science PhD candidate from University of Montana, researching climate change impacts on glacier ecosystems. She'd checked in with the ranger station in St. Mary 4 days ago, mentioned she'd be doing solo fieldwork near Morningstar Lake. Standard protocol for experienced hikers in November, though the season was pushing it. Snow had come early this year, and temperatures were already dropping into the teens at night. William had read her research proposal. Impressive work, methodical, the kind of scientist who documented everything, which made her disappearance stranger. People like Madison Garcia didn't just wander off trail and vanish. They left breadcrumbs, GPS tracks, field notes. The only thing she'd left was her car and now, apparently, someone else's teeth. William bagged 3 teeth as samples, documented the pattern with multiple photographs and measurements, then stood and surveyed the cabin. Single room, maybe 15 by 20 feet, wood stove in the corner, broken windows covered with plywood, shelves that had once held supplies now empty except for mouse droppings and ancient freeze-dried meal packets from the 1990s. The floor was rough pine, weathered gray, and the tooth spiral was positioned in the exact center of the room. Deliberate placement. Intentional. His radio crackled. "Archer, this is base. You copy?" "Copy, base. I'm at Cut Bank Station." Dispatch coordinator Tom Reeves's voice came through clearly despite the distance. November meant fewer rangers on duty, but radio coverage in this part of the park was decent. "Any sign of Garcia?" "Negative on Garcia. Found something else. Evidence of possible human remains, teeth recently extracted, arranged in a pattern. Requesting forensics team and..." "Whoa, hold on. Did you say teeth?" "Affirmative. 37 human teeth arranged in a spiral pattern inside the old ranger cabin. Silence on the other end. Then, "Archer, are you absolutely certain they're human?" William looked at the bagged specimens. He had a bachelor's in biology before he'd gone into Park Service, had taken enough anatomy courses to recognize human dentition. 95% certain, yes. They don't match any animal dental structure I'm familiar with." Jesus Christ. More silence. "All right. I'm putting in a call to Flathead County Sheriff. They'll need to send someone out. What's your position?" William checked his GPS. "Approximately 4 miles north of Cut Bank Trailhead, elevation 7,200 feet. I'm going to continue searching the immediate area for Garcia, see if there's any connection to..." "Negative, Archer. Protocol says you wait for law enforcement when you find potential crime scene evidence." "Tom, it's 3:15 p.m. Sun sets at 4:40. If Garcia's out here somewhere and she's injured, another night in these temperatures could kill her. I'm not sitting on my hands for 2 hours while a sheriff drives up from Browning." "William, I'll stay in radio contact. Check in every 15 minutes. If I find anything else unusual, I'll hold position. But I'm not abandoning a search because of some teeth that are probably from a wolf kill anyway." William didn't wait for approval. He switched his radio to emergency channel only and stepped out of the cabin into air so cold it felt like inhaling knives. The landscape was brutal in its beauty. Cut Bank Valley stretched north toward the Canadian border, flanked by peaks that scraped 9,000 feet. Snow covered everything above 7,000, and the lower elevations showed that gray-brown transition zone where winter was still deciding whether to commit. The sky was the color of old ice, and the wind came down from the mountains like it was searching for something warm to kill. William had always appreciated this environment. It was honest. If you died out here, it was because you'd made a mistake. Bad planning, poor equipment, failure to respect the danger. Not like cities where randomness and human malice made death senseless. Nature was cruel, but it was predictable. He followed a game trail north from the cabin, eyes scanning for any sign of passage. Madison's last known GPS coordinates, pulled from her research proposal, placed her target area near Morningstar Lake, roughly 6 miles northeast. In summer, an easy day hike. In November, with snow and potential weather, considerably more serious. But Madison had been experienced, had the right gear according to her equipment checklist. So where was she? William found the first sign at mile marker 2, a Nalgene water bottle, the expensive kind with the built-in filter. It was sitting upright on a flat rock beside the trail, cap screwed on tight, half full of water that had frozen solid. No signs of it being dropped or discarded. It was placed. Deliberately. He photographed it, checked the surrounding area for tracks. The ground was half frozen, not quite snow, but not quite mud either, and he found partial boot prints heading northeast, toward higher elevation. Size 7 or 8, tread pattern consistent with hiking boots. Madison Garcia's shoe size, according to her missing person report, was 7.5. William followed the tracks. They were spaced oddly, not the regular rhythm of someone hiking, but irregular, sometimes close together, sometimes with long gaps between. Like whoever was walking had been stumbling or running. At mile 3, he found the second water bottle, then a third, then a granola bar wrapper, a glove, a Patagonia fleece that matched the description of Madison's outer layer. Each item was placed, not dropped, arranged with the same deliberation as the teeth. A trail. Someone was leaving a trail. The professional part of William's mind noted that this could be good news. Garcia was alive and mobile enough to mark her path. The part of him that had found 37 teeth in a spiral was less optimistic. The temperature dropped as he gained elevation. His breath came in white clouds, and ice crystals formed on his beard. The Garmin GPS on his wrist showed he was at 7,900 feet, roughly 2 miles from Morningstar Lake. The tracks continued, but they were getting stranger. Sometimes normal hiking stride, sometimes impressions so deep it looked like someone had been jumping, landing with enormous force. At 4 o'clock, with 40 minutes until sunset, William crested a ridge and saw Morningstar Lake spread below him like a gray mirror. And standing at the shoreline, perfectly still, was Madison Garcia. William's relief lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough to register that she was alive and upright. Then his brain processed what he was actually seeing, and the relief curdled into something else. Madison Garcia stood in waist-deep water that should have been frozen, that should have killed her from hypothermia in minutes. She was naked, her clothes scattered on the shore, her skin so pale it looked translucent in the fading light. Her dark hair hung lank and wet, and her arms were raised above her head in a posture that reminded William of religious ecstasy or surrender. "Madison!" William shouted, starting down the slope toward the lake. "Madison Garcia!" She didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, arms raised, facing north toward the deeper wilderness. William hit the shoreline at a run, already pulling his emergency blanket from his pack. "Madison, I'm Ranger Archer. I'm here to help you. We need to get you warm." He reached the water's edge and stopped. The water wasn't frozen, but it should have been. The temperature was maybe 15 degrees, and Morningstar Lake was normally iced over by late October. But the surface was liquid, almost steaming, and when William dipped his hand in, the water was warm. Body temperature warm. That wasn't possible. "Madison, can you hear me?" William waded in, the warm water soaking his boots, rising to his knees. Up close, he could see Madison's skin wasn't just pale. It was wrong. Thin enough to see veins and muscle structure underneath. Her ribs were visible. Every bone in her spine standing out in sharp relief, like she'd lost 40 pounds in 4 days. Her eyes were open but unfocused. Pupils dilated so wide the irises were barely visible. Her lips moved silently, forming words William couldn't hear. He reached for her shoulder and she turned her head with mechanical precision to look directly at him. "So hungry," Madison whispered. "So hungry I could eat the whole world." Then she collapsed. William caught her, the emergency blanket tangling around them both as they went down into the warm water. Madison's skin was fever hot, burning against his hands, and she weighed almost nothing, like her bones had gone hollow. He wrapped her in the blanket, lifted her in a fireman's carry that should have been difficult with a woman her height but felt like carrying a child, and slogged back to shore. His radio was screaming. Tom's voice panicked. "Archer, respond! William, if you can hear this, Sheriff's Department found something at the trailhead." William fumbled for the radio one-handed while keeping Madison secured. "Base, this is Archer. I found Garcia. She's alive but in medical crisis. Hypothermia, severe malnutrition, possible delirium. I need immediate medevac at Morningstar Lake." "William, listen to me very carefully. The sheriff ran the dental records on those teeth you found. They're not Garcia's. They belong to 7 different people. All male, all Native American, all reported missing from the Blackfeet Reservation over the past 3 years. William stopped moving. What? There's something else. The tribal police are saying, Jesus, William, they're saying you need to get out of there right now. They're saying there's been stories about Cutbank Valley since before the park existed. Stories about... Static swallowed the transmission. William looked down at Madison Garcia, wrapped in the emergency blanket, her eyes closed, her lips still moving soundlessly. In the fading light, he could see her mouth more clearly now. Her teeth were gone. All of them. Her gums were raw and bloody, and her smile was a black void. So hungry, she mumbled, eyes still closed. So hungry. You smell warm. You smell like meat. When did I last eat? Can't remember. Can't remember anything except hunger. It's in my bones now. It's in my blood. It's teaching me things. Showing me how to find more, always more, never enough, never ever enough. William's hands shook. He laid Madison on the ground, took 3 steps back, and tried the radio again. Pure static. The sun touched the mountains. Temperature plummeted. And from somewhere in the forest to the north, William heard something that made his rational, scientific mind go completely blank with primal fear. A scream. Not human. No human throat could produce that sound. It was rage and hunger given voice. A sound that bypassed thought and went straight to the hindbrain that remembered when humans were prey. Madison's eyes snapped open. It's coming back, she whispered. It always comes back. It found me on day 2. I was doing my research, measuring ice depth, and I felt it watching. I thought I was imagining it. I'm a scientist. I don't believe in monsters. But it followed me. Every time I turned around, it was closer. I tried to run. I left markers so someone would find me. But it was faster. So much faster. And when it caught me, she started laughing, a sound like breaking glass. When it caught me, it didn't kill me. That would have been mercy. Instead, it showed me what hunger really means. Real hunger. The kind that transcends need and becomes identity. It fed me things, William. Showed me things. Taught me the language. The old language. From before the glaciers. Before the mountains. The language that hunger speaks, and now I understand. Now I'm ready. Madison Garcia sat up with movements that were too fluid, too controlled. The emergency blanket fell away. In the dying light, William saw her torso was covered in markings. Not tattoos, but something carved directly into her skin, symbols that looked like they'd been made with sharp stones. They formed patterns he didn't recognize, geometric shapes that seemed to shift when he looked directly at them. There's a ceremony, Madison continued, her voice dreamy. Very old. The Blackfeet knew it before they stopped speaking about it, before they made it taboo. When you're starving, really starving, winter starving, your whole tribe might die starving. There's a choice. Die human or survive as something else. Most people chose death, but some people, the desperate ones, the ambitious ones, the ones who wanted power more than they wanted mercy, they chose transformation. They ate what shouldn't be eaten. They welcomed the hunger in, and the hunger rewarded them. The scream came again, closer now, maybe a quarter mile away, moving fast. William's training kicked in. He grabbed his pack, checked his bear spray. Useless, his hindbrain whispered, useless against this, and started backing toward the trail. Madison, we need to move. Whatever's out there. It's not out there, William. It's in here. Madison stood up, naked and covered in blood and carved symbols, smiling with her toothless mouth. It got inside me, and now I'm inside it. We're the same thing, and we're so hungry. Do you know how many calories the human body needs to maintain basic function? 1,800 to 2,000 per day. Do you know how many calories it takes to fuel transformation? To rebuild yourself cell by cell into something that can survive winter forever, that can run 40 miles without stopping, that can hear a heartbeat from 3 miles away? She took a step toward William. Her movements were wrong. Joints bending at angles that shouldn't be possible, limbs extending too far, spine curving in ways that would snap a normal human's back. The calculation is simple, Madison continued, and her voice was changing, becoming deeper, resonating with harmonics that made William's teeth ache. One human body contains approximately 81,500 calories. That's enough to begin the change. But to complete it? To become what the Blackfeet called the Witicow, what the Algonquian called the Wendigo, what every indigenous culture in the northern forests has a name for because they all encountered it. That requires sustained feeding, multiple bodies. And once you start, you can't stop. The hunger becomes everything. The hunger is everything. William ran. Behind him, Madison laughed, a sound that became a howl, became that impossible scream he'd heard from the forest. He didn't look back. His rational mind was screaming that this couldn't be real, that hypothermia or altitude sickness or carbon monoxide from the cabin's old stove was making him hallucinate. But his body didn't care about rational explanations. His body knew predator when it heard it. The trail was treacherous in failing light. William's headlamp illuminated 10 feet ahead, no more. Trees became shadows, became potential threats. Every sound was pursuit. His breath came in ragged gasps, altitude and fear making his lungs burn. Behind him, footsteps. Not running, loping. The easy gait of something built for endurance, something that could chase prey for days without tiring. William's radio crackled. Pattern matches and old stories never stay in one place. It moves every few years and it finds isolated victims. Tribal police say, only one way to stop it. Fire. Complete incineration. He grabbed the radio without stopping. Tom, I need immediate extraction, Morningstar Lake, now. Can't. Helicopter grounded. Weather coming in and storm warning. Need to find shelter. There's no shelter. There's... Something hit him from behind with the force of a car collision. William went down hard, face first into frozen ground, his headlamp flying off and bouncing into the brush. The weight on his back was immense, fever hot. And when he tried to roll over, hands grabbed his shoulders with grip strength that made his bones creak. Madison Garcia's face loomed above him in the darkness, illuminated only by starlight. Her features were shifting, elongating. Her jaw had extended, mouth opening impossibly wide. And her eyes were completely black. No whites, no irises, just endless dark that reflected nothing. You're a scientist, the thing wearing Madison's skin whispered, and now its voice was layered, multiple voices speaking in harmony. You understand ecology, predator-prey relationships, energy transfer. I'm just a very efficient predator, William. I convert biomass into survival. That's all hunger is. Survival instinct purified. And you're full of survival instinct. I can smell it, taste it. I'm going to savor every calorie. William's hand found the bear spray on his belt. He brought it up, aimed, and discharged directly into Madison's face. The thing screamed and recoiled. William scrambled backward, grabbed a fallen branch, and swung it like a club. The branch connected with something that felt like hitting wood. Solid. Unyielding. The thing that had been Madison didn't even flinch. That won't work, it said, almost sadly. I'm not Madison anymore. She's still in here, though. She's screaming. She's been screaming since the second day, when she understood what was happening, when she felt herself being consumed from the inside out, replaced piece by piece. The Blackfeet have a word for it. Wendigo psychosis. The transformation that turns human hunger into supernatural hunger. It starts in the mind, then spreads to the body. By the time the physical changes begin, it's far too late. William backed toward a cliff edge he couldn't see but could feel in the way the ground ended. Why her? Why Madison? Because she was alone. Because she was ambitious. Did you read her research proposal? She wanted to make her name, publish groundbreaking work, push herself to extremes. That ambition tastes like hunger. That isolation tastes like desperation. And I was so hungry. It's been almost a year since the last one. That hiker who disappeared last November. I made him last through spring, rationed him carefully. But by summer I was starving again. And then Madison came. Brilliant Madison, who documented everything, who left such detailed notes about her research methodology. Perfect Madison, who would make such an excellent lore. The thing smiled with teeth that were no longer human, rows of them, serrated, designed for tearing. Because that's the beautiful part, William. Once the transformation completes, the hunger becomes strategic. You don't just eat, you hunt, you plan. You understand that one meal won't sustain you, but a reputation, a legend, that brings meals to you. People come looking for the missing, people like you, and their meat is already tenderized by fear. It lunged. William threw himself sideways, felt the thing's claws rake his shoulder, tearing through his jacket and the flesh beneath. He rolled, gained his feet, and ran straight for where his memory insisted the cliff edge was. The thing that had been Madison Garcia followed, but not quickly. It was savoring this. Playing with food. William's boot hit empty air. He had 1 second to realize he'd found the cliff, 1 second to wonder if this was better than being eaten alive, and then he was falling through darkness toward rocks below. He hit water instead. Morning Star Lake had a vertical cliff face on its western edge. William remembered from the topographical maps. He'd miscalculated his position, run west instead of south. The impact knocked every bit of air from his lungs, and the warm water he'd found strange before was now a blessing. If this had been normal November water temperature, the shock would have stopped his heart. William surfaced, gasping, disoriented. The cliff face rose 30 feet above him. At the top, silhouetted against stars, the Wendigo stood and watched. "Clever," it called down. "Mammals are so creative when frightened. But you've just made this more difficult for yourself. The lake is warm because I need it warm. This is my territory now, my hunting ground. And there's no way out except past me." William treaded water, mind racing. His pack was gone, lost in the fall. His radio was waterlogged. His GPS might still work if he could get to shore. But Madison was right. The cliff circled 3/4 of the lake. The only shore access was directly below where she stood. Where it stood. Not Madison anymore. Never Madison again. "You're a scientist," William shouted, stalling. "You know the conservation of mass principle. If you've consumed 7 people like the teeth suggest, where are the remains? You can't make that much mass just disappear." The Wendigo laughed. "You're still trying to rationalize this. That's admirable. The Blackfeet shamans wrote about this too. In the stories they're not supposed to tell anyone outside the tribe. The Wendigo doesn't just consume flesh, it consumes identity. Everything about the victim becomes part of the whole. Bones dissolve, tissues integrate, even memories get absorbed. I remember being them now, all 7 of them. I remember their last thoughts, their fears, their regrets. It's like gaining 7 lifetimes of experience, 7 perspectives, and now I'll gain yours." It dropped off the cliff with casual grace, landed in the water with barely a splash, and began swimming toward William with movements that were too fast, too efficient. William dove. The lake was deeper than he'd expected. His research memory supplied the data. Morning Star Lake, maximum depth 43 feet. He swam down through warm darkness, lungs already burning from the impact, and his hands touched something on the lake bottom. Bones. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Not just human, animal bones too. Elk and deer and bear, all mixed together in a charnel carpet covering the lake floor. This wasn't a single Wendigo's hunting ground. This was generations of them. Centuries, maybe. William's lungs screamed for air. He kicked for the surface, breached, gasped. The Wendigo's hand closed around his throat. It held him at arm's length, suspended half in and half out of the water. Up close, William could see the transformation was still ongoing. Madison Garcia's face was a mask stretched over something else, something with too many teeth and eyes that reflected starlight like an animal's. "Last chance," it whispered. "Join me. Let me inside. The hunger hurts at first, but then it becomes everything. You'll understand power you never imagined. You'll transcend human weakness. You'll become eternal." William managed to choke out, "Go to hell." The Wendigo sighed. Such a waste of good calories. It opened its mouth impossibly wide, and William, with the last of his strength, pulled the waterproof flare from his jacket pocket and ignited it directly against the Wendigo's chest. For a creature that had claimed to transcend humanity, it burned remarkably well. The flare was magnesium-based, 2,000 degrees, designed to burn even underwater for emergency rescue signals. Against flesh, even supernatural flesh, it was devastating. The Wendigo shrieked and released William, thrashing backward as fire spread across its torso. The carved symbols on its skin ignited like fuses, and the fire followed their geometric patterns with unnatural enthusiasm, as if the markings themselves were flammable. William swam for shore, arms and legs moving on pure adrenaline. Behind him, the Wendigo's screams changed pitch, became something else. Multiple voices crying out in different languages. 7 voices, 7 victims burning away like purification. He reached the narrow beach, dragged himself onto rocks, and turned to watch. The thing that had been Madison Garcia stood in knee-deep water, completely engulfed in flames that reflected off the lake surface like a mirror. It was changing as it burned, the false flesh sloughing away to reveal something underneath. Something skeletal and ancient, with antlers and too many joints and a hunger so profound it seemed to warp the air around it. "You think this ends me?" It screamed in a voice like breaking ice. "I've burned before. I've been shot, stabbed, blessed, cursed, exorcised. I always come back. The hunger always comes back, because the hunger isn't me. It's what humans become when they stop pretending to be civilized. I'm just what happens when you admit what you really are." The flames intensified. The Wendigo collapsed into the water, steam rising in great clouds. The lake temperature spiked. William could feel it from shore, the water beginning to boil, and as it boiled, the bone carpet on the lake bottom surfaced. Hundreds of skeletons rising up like a reverse burial, floating to form a raft of the dead surrounding the burning thing that had killed them. The Wendigo's screams faded. The flames guttered out, and what remained looked like Madison Garcia again, just a naked woman floating in warm water surrounded by bones. William's radio crackled to life. "Archer? William? Do you copy?" The storm passed. "We can get a helicopter to your position at first light. Repeat, extraction available at dawn. What's your status?" William stared at the floating body, at the bones, at the warm water that was slowly cooling now, ice forming at the edges where it met freezing air. "Archer? William, respond." He lifted the radio. "Base, I found Madison Garcia. She didn't make it. Send forensics. Send everybody. And contact the Blackfeet tribal police. Tell them they were right. Right about what?" William looked at the stars, at the mountains, at the wilderness that had seemed so honest and rational just hours ago. Tell them the old stories are real. The helicopter arrived at dawn, bringing sheriff's deputies and tribal police and forensics teams that documented everything. With the grim efficiency of people who'd seen worse, the bones were recovered, 93 individuals spanning back to the 1920s, when the first disappearances in Cutbank Valley were officially recorded. Unofficially, the Blackfeet elders said, it went back much farther. Madison Garcia's body was retrieved and autopsied. Cause of death: drowning. But the medical examiner noted anomalies: complete tooth loss, skeletal restructuring, tissue samples showing cellular changes that didn't match any known pathology. The report was classified. The case was closed as accidental death during solo research expedition. William spent 3 days answering questions, giving statements, and being politely skeptical about his own experience. Trauma, hypothermia, oxygen deprivation, all reasonable explanations for hallucinations. The investigators seemed relieved when he agreed with their rational conclusions. He was back on duty within a week. Standard protocol after traumatic experience. The Park Service psychologist cleared him for field work. Everything went back to normal. Except it didn't. Because William Archer, who had spent 12 years believing the world made sense, now knew better. He knew that hunger could transcend biology. That transformation was real. that some stories survived for centuries because they documented truth. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that what he'd burned in Morningstar Lake wasn't the only one. 3 months later, in February 2016, 2 hikers went missing in Yellowstone. They were experienced winter campers, well-equipped, meticulous planners. Rangers found their tent intact, sleeping bags still warm, no signs of struggle. Just 2 pairs of boots placed neatly outside the tent, and between them a spiral pattern made from 42 teeth. William saw the report, recognized the pattern, put in for immediate transfer to Yellowstone, and got it approved in record time, because he understood now. The hunger moved. It found new hunting grounds every few years, stayed just long enough to feed, then migrated before it could be cornered. And it left patterns, signatures, marking its passage like a terrible calling card. Someone needed to track those patterns. Someone needed to connect the disappearances across parks, across decades, across the continent. Someone needed to hunt the hunter. William Archer had been a skeptic, arrogant in his rationality, dismissive of folklore, certain that every mystery had a logical explanation. He'd been wrong about all of it, but he'd been right about one thing. Nature was predictable. Even supernatural nature. Patterns could be tracked. Behaviors could be predicted. And predators, even eternal ones, made mistakes. He just had to be patient, methodical, scientific, and very, very hungry for answers. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.